and we'll kind of monitor that. That'll be very helpful. If you're just starting out in business, let us know. If you're already in business, let us know. I'm joined today by Phil Truax from Truax Law, and he will be actually making a presentation. But before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about SCORE and hope that you will visit our website and maybe consider taking on a mentor to help you out with your business. I see I've got some chat coming in, so let's go. So SCORE's probably got the largest network of free volunteer small business mentors in the country. We've got about 240 chapters nationwide. As I mentioned earlier, I'm in the one here in Cleveland, and there are others spread out throughout the country, both in large cities and small cities and rural areas. So if you are wanting to work with a SCORE mentor, I'll show you how to do that in just a minute or so. But we basically are mentors that work with small businesses. We also put on workshops like this, about 150 or so a year, various kinds. And by the way, this is being streamed live on YouTube right now and will be available for you all to download somewhere along the line. But that said, we will also automatically send you a recording of this sometime in the next day or so, and you will get this. You'll be able to replay it and see what all you had listened to, and maybe found new things in there as you go back through it. So our mission is to foster small, vibrant business communities through mentoring and education, as I mentioned, giving everybody the materials and the resources that they need to thrive in business. You all know that small business is probably driving about 50% of our nation's economy. And it's really important, too, for small businesses that can accumulate wealth and ultimately bring in jobs and start new businesses and have family wealth that they can create as well. So that's really one of the things that drives our economy. So everything we do is free, including the resources on our website and the workshops that we do. We are sponsored in part by the SBA. All the other money that we need as a chapter here in Cleveland to thrive, we also fundraise on our own. So that is kind of a no-brainer for us. We go out there and find the funds that we need through third parties and grantors and funders. So what I wanted to show you was our website. And I think that you'll find that this website is quite valuable if you're a small business. I'm going to open it up quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here, but this is where you can request a local mentor. Now, I've tuned in here to the Cleveland SCORE website, but if you just go to score.org, it'll take you to the national website, which looks a lot like this, and will have all the same resources, particularly at the top. So you can find a mentor, you can find a workshop, both recorded and live, that are coming up, templates and resources. So our template gallery, which is really a valuable tool for you, has templates for finances. A lot of those are set up in Excel or Sheets, and they are Google Sheets, and they have formulas built into them. So pretty interesting and valuable tools there, as well as business plan templates and so on. And again, if you would love to volunteer with SCORE, and we always need new volunteers, go here and take a look at that. You can see our success stories and so on. But if you wanted to request a local mentor, the best way to do that would be hit that button that says request local mentor, and then start giving us your information. And based on your zip code, it will go to the chapter that is closest in service to your zip code. So I'm going to stop working on that for the moment. And I think we are ready to introduce Phil. So Phil Truax of Truax Law, who is one of our business partners, has put together a really interesting workshop. I think you'll find very resourceful, very interesting, and very valuable for you. So Phil, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you. I'm going to stop sharing. You can share your slides, and then let's go from there.
Great. Thanks, Bob. So good afternoon, everybody. Phil Truax. I started Truax Law Group in March of 2021 in Avon, Ohio, so about 25 minutes west of Cleveland. I've been a lawyer for almost 20 years, representing businesses mostly in construction and real estate, but we have a lot of other clients in different other small businesses around Northern Ohio, as well as some other parts of the Midwest. Before I get going, you're gonna have to forgive me a little bit. I've got a still dangling upper respiratory virus that I've been dealing with, and it's gonna make me cough. So I'm gonna do my best to hold off my cough and make it as least disruptive as possible for our presentation. But I'm going to talk about the 10 legal mistakes that business owners make. There's a lot of other mistakes that business owners make other than the 10 that I'm going to highlight. But I'm going to highlight 10 legal ones. And excuse me, and if I can, I'll probably chime in on some other observations that I've seen of things to keep in mind. The objective here is not for everyone to walk away with a massive to-do list of, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do all of these things in order to start my business and make my business go. The idea here is just to increase awareness of the things that as business lawyers we've seen, and I do both work on, and my firm does both work on startup and establishment and contracts, front end legal work, as well as dispute resolution, litigation, arbitration. So when we do these types of things, we try to do a lot of lessons learned, because some of our clients end up in court. Some of our clients end up in arbitration, and there's reasons why that happens, and there's takeaways that happen from that. So when we do these types of presentations, we try to provide some of those horror stories that some of our clients have gone through, to really just give you an eyes wide open of, hey, we need to make sure that we do some of these things. So let's go ahead and begin. I'll share my screen with the slides, and we can get this process started. We can see the slides there.
You're good.
All right. So there's our title screen. So let's go ahead and get moving along with our slides. There we go. Okay. Is my camera screen on the upper right-hand corner right now? Or is it just the slide?
I'm just seeing the slide. You're fine.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure. Okay. So mistake number one. This is essentially starting up the business properly. If you're starting up a small business on your own by yourself with no partners, this is less relevant for you, unless you anticipate bringing on partners in the future. If you are starting up a company, whether it's a holding company for real estate or the actual operating entity, with other people, this is very important. Most people tend to start businesses with friends or previous business colleagues, and they tend to gloss over a lot of these details that we have up here in the bullet points. But who owns what percentages of the company? How will equity or additional dollars be invested? Are there buyout provisions? If somebody decides they don't want to work together anymore, they don't want to be in the business, how does that work? What happens if somebody passes away? How is that going to be managed? And all of these types of issues are handled in the company document, like an operating agreement or corporate bylaws or rules and regulations. Every entity in the state of Ohio, just like pretty much every other state, should have the governing rules, the governing document. For LLCs, it's an operating agreement. For partnerships, it's a partnership agreement. So again, if you're doing this by yourself, you don't necessarily need an operating agreement. But if it's a corporation, you do, and we'll get into that in a minute. but this kind of lays out the groundwork for what is the agreement between the owners of how we're going to run this business together and how we're going to manage the business together. So let's go on to the next one, which is not selecting the best business structure. Some of you may be starting your business and you don't have your business entity, your separate business entity set up. You don't have your LLC, you don't have your corporation, you don't have your partnership or whatever it may be. And that's a mistake. You want to make sure that you have, number one, a separate entity that is going to be the owner of the business. That's going to be the where things happen, where the liabilities and the assets happen. You may be the sole owner of the business, and you may have the rights to the profits. But you want to make sure that that's all flowing through a separate entity that is not you. You want to keep your business assets and liabilities separate from your personal assets and liabilities. If you run your company, your business, without an entity, then what you're doing is you're leaving your personal assets at risk for what happens with your business. So say you're starting up a home remodeling company or a website digital marketing company where you want to help people with social media or whatever it is. If something happens with that company and you don't have your business rather negatively, and you don't have a separate entity set up, you could be subjecting your house to liabilities as a result of business risks and claims that might be made by vendors or customers. So you want to make sure that you have a separate entity set up. Sole proprietors, that second bullet there, that's what it means when you maybe have a name of your company, ABC Social Media Marketing. Well, if ABC Social Media Marketing doesn't have a separate LLC corporation, separate entity set up with the Ohio Secretary of State's website and have its separate employee identification number with the IRS, then all it is ABC Social Media Marketing. And that's just the name of the company. That's the name of the business, rather. It's still legally you personally who are conducting business, which means that your assets are at risk. So you want to make sure you have an entity, and then you want to make sure that you're working with your accountant, your bookkeeper, your score mentor, your lawyer. What kind of entity do we want? What limited liability is actually an LLC. A lot of people have heard LLCs. It's actually a fairly new creation under the law. It used to be that LLCs didn't exist. They came along and created an LLC. It's a flexible business entity. An LLC is actually a partnership. However, it's treated slightly differently under the law. And with a partnership, you can work with your accountant to have that entity taxed in a different way that may be more advantageous to you. So you can have it taxed as an S Corp, for example, and there are tax advantages to doing that. And those are obviously conversations that you want to have with your professionals. You want to have with people who you're relying on, which you're here as SCORE mentees and members, which is great because that means you're already relying on someone smarter than you about something that has to do with business. And you should keep doing that. You're really good at the business of what you're in, but there's a whole lot of things that you don't have a lot of experience in, and keep relying on those professionals to guide you and provide you with ideas. And this here is something that's very technical. What business structure, what business entity do we choose? That's something that you really want to make sure you're relying on the right people for to give you the guidance that you need. And then there's benefits to having a corporation instead of an LLC. Some people form partnerships, and there's different types of partnerships. There's general partnerships and limited liability partnerships and things like that. So there's lots of different options for entities. Certainly, we see a lot more people filing LLCs and using LLCs as their business entity and that gives them some flexibility. So we do see that quite often. Mistake number 3 is not having a thorough or appropriate rules document. Any one of you could go to the Secretary of State's website, file ABC Social Media Marketing LLC as your company, and jump onto LegalZoom, or there's a zillion other legal resource websites, and pull an operating agreement. In fact, some of you may have already done this. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you can pull a form and create an operating agreement, and you're okay. The real problem comes in when you form a company with partners, or you're going to form a company where you're going to bring on partners. You anticipate getting an investor, for example, or you're waiting for your uncle to retire, and your uncle is going to come on as a minority partner and help you run this business. That's where you really want to make sure that you have the proper operating agreement, code of regulations, bylaws set up, and have that ready to go, so that all of those rules are set forth on how this company is going to be managed. If you've got 3 partners, what types of things are required by votes of the partners or the members of an LLC, and what decisions can be made by one particular person? Does any of one of those 3 have the authority to make decisions to sign a new lease, for example? Or does signing a new lease can that only be decided by one person because they're designated as the manager, or they're designated as an officer? Sometimes these rules documents indicate that there must be unanimous consent given for certain, what you'd call big ticket items, like buying a piece of real estate or something along those lines. There could be any number of things where, when you set up the original rules of the document, we decide that we want unanimous consent for these 10 different items. And a lot of times, again, you're going to rely on your professionals, your advisors, who are going to give you ideas of things that we've seen where you don't want one person to be able to make this decision. This decision is very important, and you want to make that decision subject to the unanimous consent of everybody. It is always a good idea to have one kind of point person who's able to make decisions, who can sign contracts, who can make significant purchases, who can hire people, who can fire people. But you may decide that all of those decisions have to run through the partners, have to run through the members. Well, the only thing that actually is going to govern that is having a good operating agreement, having a good set of bylaws or code of regulations, depending on what the document is. And then you want to make sure that not only do you have that agreement, that rules document, but that you have what some lawyers refer to as a corporate record book. And sometimes this is electronic, or it's just maintained on a server or a system or on the cloud. And the corporate record book has a copy of the most recent copy of the code of regulations or the operating agreement. It's got the initial document that you get from the Ohio Secretary of State's website as the Articles of Organization, the formalized document that confirms that this entity was validly formed in the state of Ohio. And you've got the EIN letter that comes from the IRS that they send you, usually via email, to verify that you have an EIN number. And then there may be requirements that you want to have, where you have to have a corporate meeting every year. And the corporate meeting every year, this is a requirement for corporations, by the way. All corporations have to have an annual meeting. LLCs, you don't, but maybe you want to. Maybe there's a reason why you want to have that. A lot of us have probably, in starting small businesses, have heard the classic phrase of, you want to be working on your business, not in your business. And so from day to day, you're working in your business, you're trying to get things done, but every now and again, you want to take a step out, and you actually want to hover over your business and get a bird's eye view of what's going on with your business. Well, this is one thing that you might have on that day where you're not in the guts of the business, but you're actually hovering over and you're thinking strategy and you're thinking big picture things, having an annual meeting of sorts for the company, even if it's just you, even if you don't have any partners, but you want to make sure that my corporate documents are where they need to be and we have everything kind of arranged properly. Bob, go ahead.
So Phil, I have two questions here that came in through chat. I'm monitoring the chat, and I think they're timing wise not bad. So one, is a host a registered agent?
Is what a registered agent?
Host, Host.
Is a host a registered agent? Um, well, so I'm not sure I understand the question. So let me talk, and if this clarifies it, hopefully it does. When you form the entity, every entity has to have a registered agent, or in Ohio, it's actually called a statutory agent. And that agent is the person who is authorized to receive official process, official mailings, whether it's from the government, whether it's from a court, whatever it is. And that person does not have to be an owner. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's directly involved in the business. You can actually pay an annual fee to different entities to act as the registered agent or the statutory agent. A lot of times it is the sole owner or one of the owners who decides they want to be the statutory agent. The exception to that is when you don't want your name and address on the Ohio Secretary of State's website directly affiliated with the entity. And the reason for that just may be from privacy purposes, because you don't want people jumping on the Ohio State Secretary of State's website and finding you and tracking you down and contacting you directly personally, which I have had clients that have struggled with that in the past. So it can happen, but a lot of times it doesn't. It's not a huge concern.
Okay.
I hope, does that answer the host question?
Not sure, but it definitely defines statutory agent well.
Okay.
Yeah. So one other one. Let's see. Hang on a second. Is it okay to remain an LLC if you're pursuing investors?
Good question. It is. A lot of CPAs, attorneys recommend C Corps when you're pursuing investors because of how C Corps are managed and set up with shares and different levels of shares and things like that. But there's nothing about an LLC that you shouldn't have an LLC if you're going to seek investors. You just want to make sure that that operating agreement is crystal clear on what the different investors' equity interests are going to be, if they are going to be equity interests. You can do things like profits interests for certain owners. You can effectively have different classes of membership shares. That's what a ownership or a share of an LLC is called. It's called a membership interest. So you can effectively have different classes of membership interests within an LLC. You and your cousin may be the 50-50 owners, the members of the LLC, but you may also bring on investors who don't want to just loan money, which is an option, right? You can get a $50,000 investment from 3 different people, and the company agrees that they're going to pay that person back within 3 years at 10% interest. So you could do that. You could also do a situation where they do actually have an ownership interest, but it's not direct equity. It's a profits interest. So they get a piece of profits. But ultimately, if and when the company's sold, they don't get what's left over for purposes of selling the company. But as a going concern, they get a profits interest. So that's a long-winded way of us saying you can continue to be an LLC if you're going to seek investors. But before you start that process, definitely ironing out all of the rules of what those investors are going to be walking into is very important, because before they start cutting checks and signing anything, they're going to want to review that operating agreement, and you're going to want to make sure that as the owner, I know how these people are going to be stepping in on equal footing.
Excellent. So I've got others, but I'm going to hold off till the end. Otherwise, you'll never get through this.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
when you're done, if you can stay on, we can answer questions that come up.
Okay.
Um, so I'm going to jump off and just listen, and I'll monitor the questions.
Very good. All right. Number four. This is one where conceivably we could talk forever about. I am not an employment lawyer. I've practiced law and for businesses for a long enough time where I've run into a number of employment and labor issues, especially in the construction industry. But I can at least advise enough to tell you that taking employee HR matters seriously is a critical piece of your business. Now, if it's just going to be you for a while, you can obviously get away with not spending too much time on this issue. But the moment that you start hiring employees, there's a whole slew of issues that you got to pay attention to. One of the first things that you want to do is have an employee handbook. You obviously have to have workers' compensation. If you're paying somebody, you've got to have what's called an I-9 form, which is actually an immigration department form document to verify that you're hiring U.S. citizens, and if not, why. So you could see the various bullet points that pop up here. You've got to decide when you're going to have employees, what types of benefits are you going to provide these employees? There's a lot of small businesses that don't offer the same benefits that you see larger employers offer. And that's okay because you're a small business. You only have so many resources that you're able to devote, but maybe you have a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan where you do want to offer benefits. And by benefits, I mean retirement type benefits, 401k, stuff like that. What are you going to do as it relates to medical benefits, healthcare benefits? That's expensive. I can tell you, I just jumped into that pool recently and it's a lot. But I knew that our people here want that and need that. Some have their medical benefits through others, through other resources, but some required that. And we decided to go ahead and go down that road. But you got to be ready for it. And boy, is it a winding road to understand healthcare benefits. So there's that. And then there's all types of things like PTO. What are your employees entitled to PTO? When? How? Do PTO hours run over? Meaning you finish the year with 5 days of PTO. Do those 5 years go on to the next year? Or do you use it or lose it type thing? All these things need to be hammered out in the employee handbook. And the good news is there's a bazillion employee handbook forms that are out there. And the reason why that's particularly good is because it at least gives you a starting point of the things that you want or don't want. Excuse me, want or don't want in your employee handbook, and the types of things that you want to offer your employees and the things that you may not be willing to. So at least that kind of gives you some brainstorming resources that you can use before you actually have an HR expert or an attorney to review that handbook to make sure that you're in a good place. CPAs, by the way, are also very good resources for a lot of these upfront employee issues with payroll, with workers' comp, because they advise all of their clients on these types of things. So I can tell you my CPA was invaluable when I started my firm in March of 2021. I didn't know anything about this stuff. And he was very helpful because he's got 300 clients who they all require all these things and they've been through it a million times. So your CPA is invariably going to be a very important asset for you on this particular item. Number 5, again, this is especially critical when you have partners. If you don't, though, you still want to have some type of plan for your business if something happens to you. I happen to be the sole owner of my law firm, and I don't think my wife wants to own my law firm if something happens to me tomorrow. So there needs to be some type of a plan for what is going to happen to the company if something happens to you. Or if there's partners, what happens if your partner passes away? Pretty good chance that you don't want to continue on the business, owning and sharing responsibilities of your business with your partner's spouse. That this happens a lot. It happens all the time where people do not have things set up. There's ways that you can. One of the very common ways of dealing with this, by the way, is having life insurance set up for both partners, so that the company basically gets money to buy out the estate of the partner, of one of the owners, and then that way the business then owns the deceased partner shares, and the surviving partner does not have to be stuck with sharing the business with a spouse or with a child, an adult child, who would be technically next to step up in the event of any death. But you can see there's 4 other D's there: disability, divorce, departure, disagreement. So having the operating agreement, having the bylaws, having those documents that provide for those types of contingencies is a very good idea. Buy-sell agreements, not every operating agreement is going to reference buy-sell agreements. Some of those operating agreements, bylaws, codes of regulations, they have certain restrictions, transfer restrictions. You don't want your partner just going and finding somebody else and selling his shares to another partner. That would obviously be a bad thing for you. So there are provisions in those documents that prevent that type of activity, or at least give you what's called a first right of refusal. But buy-sell is more along the lines of, there are certain circumstances where I, as a one of 4 owners of a company, may decide I want out. Well, am I allowed that? Am I allowed to just say I want out and I want a payment plan to be bought out? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you can't have a voluntary termination of shares and transfer of shares. It's just going to depend on what the partners agree to. But having this succession plan, what happens to the company? What happens to our shares if something happens to one of us or to both of us? It's kind of like estate planning for people with wills and trusts. Businesses are just another legal person, much like you and me. Businesses are their own legal person, and businesses should have their own estate plan. They're called succession plans. And the last bullet there is, at some point in the not too distant future, you want to know what the company's worth, especially when you have multiple owners. Because if something happens to somebody in one of the owners, they die, or if there is an agreeable way to buy out, you want to understand what that business is worth. And sometimes that's easier said than done, to understand what the business is worth. There are people who are certified specifically at valuing businesses, and they happen to be expensive. But there's other ways to at least get general or agreed upon values of businesses. And at least having that at some point is an important thing to do. Mistake number 6 is not having a handle on insurance and indemnification. Indemnification is another thing that you can go on and on about as a lawyer to explain on what that means. But insurance, let's start with insurance. Everybody needs to have different levels of insurance as a business owner. There's business owners insurance. There's errors and omissions insurance. There's general liability insurance that governs things that happen around your business or around your place of business. What happens if you're working from home? If you're just working out of your basement or your garage or an office? What is the overlap between having personal insurance and having business insurance? This is where having a insurance agent who can advise you. Now, let me just say one thing about insurance agents. There's a lot of insurance agents that are out there who are mostly interested and qualified at selling insurance. Okay. And that's great. That everybody needs to make a living, and those folks need to make a living as well. You need to find the insurance agent who understands your business, understands the risks that are associated with your business, and can advise you on procuring the proper insurance coverage that is going to protect you from those risks. If you're just buying business insurance or personal insurance for that matter, there's a really good chance you're not getting the proper additional coverages and endorsements and things like that that come along with builder's risk coverage if you're in real estate or business owners insurance or Arizona Mission insurance. Insurance is complicated, and they're insurance contracts. At the end of the day, insurance coverages are given pursuant to a contract between you or your business and the insurance company. And that's what an insurance policy is. And all the amendments and endorsements and additional coverages that are added onto that policy, it's just a big, confusing contract. And at the end of the day, if your contract doesn't have the coverages that you think you should have, it doesn't matter because that's the contract that you've signed. And the best way to make sure that the contract, the policy that you have says everything that it needs to have is to have a really competent insurance agent who understands what you need and how you need it. So sometimes, we talk about having a really good lawyer, having a really good CPA, having really good advisors, having a really good mentor. Having a really good insurance agent is right up on par with that person being one of your best advisors. Indemnification is a complicated legal process, legal term. But what it essentially means is there's a lot of times when you sign contracts where with vendors or with customers where you're agreeing to indemnify the customer, for example, from any claims or losses. And what that means is you're agreeing to cover any claims or losses that they have that might be relating to your services or your goods or your products that you're actually selling. And a lot of times you want that insurance, you want to have insurance cover all your indemnification responsibilities. How do you do that? You got to make sure that your insurance agent has a clear understanding of what risks you're getting involved in. There's almost every business contract has some type of indemnification involved in it. And so you obviously making sure that you have legal counsel who can help you navigate through the contracts that you're signing or contracts that you're issuing. You may have contracts that are part of your business that you are asking customers to sign or vendors to sign. There's all types of these legal requirements that are in these contracts, and indemnification is often one of them. And sometimes there are narrow indemnification obligations, and sometimes there are very broad indemnification responsibilities. And broad indemnification is not something you really want to have yourself in. Sometimes you don't have a choice because of the customer's contract. But the more that you can learn about indemnification, you can learn about insurance and working with your insurance agent, you want to be able to make sure that whether it's narrow or broad, you've got the insurance to cover that narrow or broadness. Otherwise, you're talking about the business assets of the company that may be at risk in the event of any liability that pops up. All right, number 7. This kind of ties back to HR type responsibilities, but having clear policies and procedures. There's a zillion different types of policies and procedures. And I would recommend that as someone who's 3.5 years into owning a business, starting and owning a business, have as many policies and procedures as you can have them available to all your people, and whether they're independent contractors or employees, and make sure they're written and write them out. Participate in that process to know what policies and procedures do you want. These are legal policies and procedures that are up on the slide now. Employment, times of day, lunch, breaks, personal cell phone use, that kind of stuff. And there's, leave policies. So maternity, paternity, adoption, sick leave, personal leave, bereavement, somebody passes away, are they entitled to a certain number of days if somebody dies in their family? And that's on top of PTO or not. And then there's things like non-competes, which for a brief period of time, non-competes were illegal by executive order. I would say that most lawyers predicted what just happened, which is that a court struck that down, and now non-competes are legal again. They need to be reasonable. They need to be a reasonable period of time and a reasonable geographic limitation for non-competes. But then there's also things like confidentiality. What's not on the slide is something called non-solicitation policies, which is agreeing not to solicit the business's employees, not agreeing not to solicit the business's customers. Those are agreements and policies that are typically things that businesses look at. And then employee confidentiality, like things like not only keeping company data safe and holding it confidentially, not sharing it with others. You may want employees to keep their compensation and their benefits, their own benefits and their own compensation confidential, so they don't share those with others. Those are all legal type policies and procedures. But then there may be things like preparing work orders, preparing purchase orders, documenting things that are associated with your business, having certain reporting requirements and making sure those are properly documented and saved and organized. All of those are non-legal policies and procedures, but certainly things that you want to be thinking about. So the more that you can wed your business and your employees to policy and procedure, the more streamlined that you can make things. But from a legal standpoint, these are policies and procedures that you want in place to protect the company and protect you as the business owner. Having proper contracts in place. We talked about this a little bit already. There's a really good chance that you are going to have contracts in place. If you're all digital, you still are going to have contracts in place. You're going to want to, it may be simple as having, terms and conditions that you're providing a service for your customers and that it's digital. You may not write out an actual contract, but you want them to agree that these are the terms under which that you're going to perform services. You buy services or products from others that are part of your business, vendor agreements, subcontracts, whatever that may be, supply agreements. All of these things are contracts that are the Bible as far as the relationship goes between the business and any third party. So you have to make sure that that document is going to have all the terms that you want them to have, and that your supplier or your customer, client, or whatever are going to agree to. In Ohio, contracts are honored. Courts, arbitrators look to the contract. And if somebody is going to testify in a dispute that, well, this is what the contract said, but here's what we talked about later, or they knew we were doing these additional services, they asked for it, we did it. But if the contract says that the document needs to be amended to provide for additional services in order to be paid, then that's what's going to be enforced, no matter whether you've done the additional services or not. So you cannot downplay the significance and the importance of contracts, whether it's with customers, clients, or whether it's with vendors, suppliers, which may mean that you may need to have contract forms that you're using, or at least be in a position to review contracts that you're receiving from others. But don't fall into the trap of just doing work, doing services, providing goods that don't come with contracts, that don't rely on contracts. It'd be great if we could all do business based on handshakes. I might be out of work, but the reality is that things change, interpretations change, interpretations are different. How people receive communications, hear things are different from the way that you hear them coming out of your mouth. It's best for clarity, for security, to make sure that you have contracts and that these contracts are proper and in place as you're doing business. Handling of data, making sure that data that you're holding, whether it's customer data, your employees' data, is held in the right place and is secure. so that you're working with an IT vendor who is helping you make sure that your Office 365 or your Apple operating system that you're using is making sure that things are encrypted or things are protected appropriately. If you're holding customer information, as lawyers, we have lots of customer information, customer documents, things like that. We have to make sure that we are very careful and that our systems are taking care of that customer information very carefully and appropriately, because we can be responsible if something happens to customer data. So you've got to take that into account, that whether it's digital information or whether it's paper information, how are you handling and holding on to that information to make sure that there's no issues? And this is, of course, even more of a concern in the era of remote work, working from home. Most people's personal computer systems aren't necessarily the most secure systems. Lots of people like to work from Starbucks or wherever. And that's fine. It's convenient to do that. But I got news for you, that when you're working at a Starbucks, you're not working with the most secure situation possible. And if you're working with client data or vendor data or your own sensitive data, you're putting yourself and the company and all those people who are trusting you at risk. And then along the lines of, when you do have employees, firm provided equipment. So your company's equipment, making sure that you're tracking all of that information. You're tracking the fact that the company is providing its employees a phone or a laptop or a tablet or whatever it is, and keeping track of that type of thing so that the company doesn't lose those products. And then the last one is not using your professionals. And that's a joke, especially an attorney, but not necessarily, because you really need to be using an attorney. You've got to make sure that, again, being smart enough to know what you don't know, and making sure that your budget, your business plan, is accounting for the fact that you're going to be needing professionals. There's a time and place where the company, especially at its infancy, may not have the budget for a CPA to rely on your CPA on a monthly or quarterly basis. Same goes for an attorney. But you want to get in a position where you're able to budget for these professionals. Whether you know it or not, you budget for insurance or financial advice. You may have mutual funds with your financial advisor. Well, that's easy to budget because the money just gets taken out every period of time for fees and what have you. And that's okay. Same with insurance. Your insurance agent is getting paid out of the premiums. With lawyers, accountants, other types of professionals, you actually have to pay out of pocket for those services. And you don't want to disincentivize yourself from using that expert advice by saying, oh, I don't have to pay any more money to my accountant to get advice on how I should designate this income that just came in or this expense. That's a terrible mindset to have, candidly, because how you designate an expense, for example, in your office may have a significant impact of what you can write off or what you can declare as a business expense to lower your taxable income, for example, which could have a significant impact on your annual bottom line. You're not going to know that unless you're actually having the conversations with the people who are experts at these kinds of things. So attorneys can be expensive, but if you're upfront, if you're proactive with your attorney, your bills are significantly lower than if you try to cut corners and then you find yourself calling an attorney saying, all right, here's the situation, here's what we did, here's now where we have a problem. That type of situation is often far more expensive than being more proactive and recognizing that you're going to have those expenses up front. This is just a kind of a takeaway, a breakdown of things that we've talked about. So no new information on the slide, just kind of summarizes where we're at and making sure that these legal mistakes, these legal pitfalls, landmines, if you will, are at least aware. And hopefully after going through these slides, you're a little bit more attentive and aware of the types of things. Again, don't tell yourself, don't walk away from this saying, I have all the stuff that I have to do. You do, but you don't have to do it tomorrow. It's things where you really need to look at, make a list of priorities, and then get through the process of, okay, what are the 2-3 most important things that I got to attack now in order to best protect the business, and then what are some other things that I know that I need to attack later. So that is where I'm just seeing this the chat, slide 8. I can share these too, Bob. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, in fact, a question came up, could they have the slides? And I did say yes, so yeah,
Okay,
we'll have.
you've got them. So you have my permission to share those with everybody involved. That's
Appreciate
no
that.
problem.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. So, just based on what you had just said, there should be a line item somewhere in your expenses and or in your budgets for professional services. And you should take into consideration all those areas that Phil brought up. We always advise that as well. So why don't I, if you're okay, go back through the chat and see what we can come up with. That's Q&A. I've got a few Q&As here first, and then I'll go back through the chat. Can I add a succession plan to my current will? How will I get value for my business? And some of these are personal questions. I don't mean personal, but questions that you should definitely take to your attorney. Phil can't necessarily answer them all right here.
Yeah. Can you have a business succession in your will? Yeah. What I would tell you is that you're going to want to have a conversation with the estate planning attorney that you met with, because in some circumstances, a trust is more important than, or is more appropriate in a business ownership situation than a will. It's not 100% true that that's the answer every single time, but having a conversation with the estate planning attorney who you worked with, hopefully you worked with one, and then if not, then you may want to have that kind of conversation. But the answer to the question is yes, you can have a succession plan that's tied to your personal estate plan, and that's what it should be. But what you also need to do is make sure that the governing company document is consistent with that estate plan, especially when you have more than one owner.
Excellent. Okay, somebody had actually asked for your information, so I'm gonna share that with them. So let me just hide this stuff. So that's Phil's information. If for any reason you need to get a hold of him. So I am now going to stop sharing. Hopefully you've gotten that. And let's go back to the Q&A for one sec. Let's see. We got that one. Is there a free or minimal service for contracts and agreements? So I assume that you're asking if an attorney is going to work with you, what's the minimum? I'm not sure if that's a question you can answer, Phil, or you need a lot more information in order to do that.
Yeah, typically in order to review contracts, for example, whether it's our firm or someone else is going to want to know, we got to know more about the business in question. We need to, we want to make sure that we know like what kinds of contracts, how long those contracts are. So what I would say is normally you're going to want to have an initial conversation with an attorney to just give the attorney the opportunity to have a bird's eye view of what types of contracts that you've got and what you need. And then from there, you can get a better sense of, okay, well, you've got 3 different contract forms that you're currently using. Those are 3 pages a piece. And, here's what I would quote in order to review and update those documents for you. That's usually the conversation we'd want to have. if you can stay away from the hourly billing when it comes to contracts, you can push for some fixed fees. We try to do that because we know small businesses have to budget for those types of things. Sometimes it's a little unwieldy and it's a little difficult to do the fixed fee um, to review contracts. But the more that the lawyer knows up front, the better position they are to at least give you an estimate of what a quoted price could be.
Yep. So, a couple other things. How much liability do I have over client data stored in a CRM? For example, HubSpot.
Yeah, just like you're holding it in your server. So whether you're using a CRM, you can effectively try to shift responsibility on HubSpot or whatever Salesforce or whoever it is, but those guys typically have pretty solid contracts to preclude indemnity type liability. So making sure that you have the ability to review that agreement with a CRM provider. But if I'm one of your customers and I give you my data, where you put that data, whether it's on your server or you're using a third party to hold that data, I'm still relying on you to care for my data. What you do with the data to store it, I don't know, but I know that I don't want you to lose my data if I'm the customer. So I think your liability is the same. You just may have the ability to shift that liability depending on what your agreement with your data or CRM supplier has in place.
We're almost through the questions. So, somebody had talked about potentially mentioning FinCEN, and if you do it quick because it could take hours just to go through that. But there is a presentation, I think, on the SCORE website that we've done in the past, and I'm sure we'll do again, very specifically to FinCEN.
Yeah.
I
Thanks.
mean, you could sit here and talk all day about it. I know.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's one of those things too, where making sure that you really understand what sector or industry that your business is in and how different FinCEN responsibilities and obligations and requirements are going to fit in and how they're going to impact you and your company. That's kind of one of those where it's like, boy, I don't even know where to start in order to attack that in something like this. That's probably best for a one-on-one because it's so case by case.
Yeah, no, I agree. So for people to understand that there is a law coming up on the books, I think it is going to be the 1st of January of 24. If you're an LLC, well, you need to go in and register on the government site. It is primarily set up so that people cannot launder money. Because there are a lot of blind corporations set up where they can't have there's just no, it's not traceable. So people have been laundering money through that kind of site or those types of sites and those businesses. So you're going to have to just kind of look at it on your own. If you go on to the SCORE website, it's out there. There are some recorded workshops that have been done very directly for that. So take a look at that. And I don't think we have time to say much more than that. I've got exactly 1 o'clock. And so if you all need to get off, I see a few people that have dropped. I think that we got most of the questions answered. If I missed anything, I apologize. But I don't want to keep everybody on much longer than this. So we've got a lot of people with a lot of small businesses. The one thing we didn't talk about at all is nonprofits. I saw 1 or 2 people who have given us some information through chat about their businesses, and those are nonprofits. So what I would recommend is that I know that SCORE does a lot of work with nonprofits. Find yourself a mentor and or go on to a workshop. There are several workshops on how to start, how to get grants, how to manage, how to grow. and so on. So take a look at those as well. And I think that's it. Phil, great job. Thank you so much. I think that what you have given us is helpful. I know that I will look at this again every time I have a brand new client. So I think that's great.
Fantastic. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm glad people got some value from it.
Good deal. Thanks all, and look forward to seeing you on